The Catholic sexual abuse cases in Canada are well documented dating back to the 1960s. The preponderance of criminal cases with Canadian Catholic dioceses named as defendants that have surfaced since the 1980s strongly indicate that these cases were far more widespread than previously believed. While recent media reports have centered on Newfoundland dioceses, there have been reported cases tested in court with criminal convictions in almost all Canadian provinces. Sexual assault is the act of an individual touching another individual sexually and or committing sexual activities forcefully and or without the other person's consent. The phrase Catholic sexual abuse cases refers to acts of sexual abuse, typically child sexual abuse, by members of authority in the Catholic Church, such as priests. Such cases have been occurring sporadically since the 11th century in Catholic churches around the world, including the United States. This article summarizes some of the most notable Catholic sexual abuse cases in Canadian provinces. Sexual abuse cases by province. Alberta. Father Robert Joe S. White. Between 1962 and 1982, Father Robert Joe S. White abused 18 boys and girls during his time as a parish priest of St. Pius Catholic Church and a Catholic high school teacher. He abused children at a youth camp near Radium, BC. In 1989, White was charged 18 count of sexual abuse and pleaded guilty to each charge in January 1990. White, who received a 4-year prison sentence, is among at least 4 Basilian Order priests in Canada accused of sex abuse. In 2016, a 52-year-old man who claimed that White molested him when he was between the ages of 8 and 15 filed a lawsuit at the Calgary Court Centre. The estate of White, who died in 2014, and the Catholic Church in Alberta were each named as defendants in the lawsuit. The plaintiff, who was also serving as an altar boy at the time of the alleged abuse, requested $4 million from the Alberta Catholic Church. Rev. Patrick O'Neill. In 1997, Archdiocese of Edmonton priest Reverend Patrick O'Neill was convicted of sexually abusing 3 Alberta boys between 1971 and 1984. In November 1998, was sentenced to 2 years and less than a day in prison. In 1999, O'Neill received a conditional sentence after pleading guilty to sexually abusing 2 Irish boys he brought to Edmonton for a holiday in the mid-1990s. January 2012, a 51-year-old former altar boy who claimed he was sexually abused by O'Neill in the early and mid-1970s filed 2 $3.4 million lawsuits against the Archdiocese of Edmonton. New Brunswick. As of 2017, court records indicate at least 56 cases of child sexual abuse involving the New Brunswick dioceses are currently before the courts. According to one CBC report, almost every month for a year, lawsuits have been filed against the Catholic Church in New Brunswick by alleged victims seeking compensation for sexual abuse by priests. British Columbia. Archdiocese of Vancouver. In 2019, the Archdiocese of Vancouver publicly named 9 clergymen who were criminally convicted of sexual abuse or who had civil lawsuits related to abuse settled against them. It was also acknowledged that the Archdiocese was aware of 36 sex abuse cases since the 1950s, which involved 26 children. The Archdiocese of Vancouver was the first among Canada's 60 Catholic dioceses to make this information public. In August 2020, a new sex abuse lawsuit was filed against the Archdiocese of Vancouver. The lead plaintiff, identified only by the initials KS in the court documents, said the priest in charge of St. Francis of Assisi School, Father Michael Cunningham, sexually assaulted her while she was a student at the school in the 80s. She was around 11 years old at the time of the alleged abuse. Cunningham, who died 4 days after the lawsuit was filed, was not among the 9 clergy listed by the Archdiocese in 2019. The lawsuit also alleges the Archdiocese of Vancouver followed marching orders from the Vatican for years on how to bury allegations of abuse within its parishes. Hubert Patrick O'Connor. Hubert Patrick O'Connor was a Canadian Roman Catholic bishop of Prince George in British Columbia who was forced to resign following sex abuse charges filed against him. Father Damien Lawrence Cooper. Father Damien Lawrence Cooper is a Vancouver priest who was first accused of sexual abuse in 1994. He was sued in the BC Supreme Court along with the Archdiocese of Vancouver on September 29, 2014. The plaintiff visited the priest for counseling prior to the abuse, and was 16 years old when the sexual abuse began. Media coverage of the lawsuit unearthed the fact that, despite initial claims of having removed Father Cooper permanently from the priestly ministry when the abuse was first admitted in 1994, the Archdiocese of Vancouver instead sent him to work in an archdiocese on Long Island, NY. In Long Island, he then committed problems of a similar nature. The Archdiocese's official comments to the media referred to the abuse as an affair, which raised public expressions of concern, including questions about whether the Archdiocese was being legally aggressive or simply remained ignorant of the nature of pastoral sexual exploitation when it equated sexual exploitation of a minor and a congregant with an affair. Father Cooper was still a priest of the Archdiocese of Vancouver at this time, technically on leave, but had not been liaised, permanently removed from active ministry as a priest. He lives in Vancouver, Washington. Father Orlando Mullen. On August 25, 2020, British Columbia Justice David Crossan ordered the office of the Bishop of Kamloops and retired priest Father Orlando Mullen, who was by then 88 years old, to pay $844,140 in damages to Rosemary Anderson, who claimed Mullen raped her 70 to 100 times in 1976 and 1977, beginning when she was 26 years old. Anderson claimed Mullen offered her counseling when she was grieving her father's death. During the lawsuit, former Kamloops bishop, and future Vancouver Archbishop, Adam Exner, who was previously Mullen's superior, conceded during witness testimony that he knew Mullen was molesting people, including Anderson. Exner also stated that Mullen was not stripped of his priesthood status until after Anderson told him that Mullen raped her and suggested that she marry him. Newfoundland. In 1988, a scandal erupted over allegations of widespread abuse of children at Mount Cashel Orphanage in Newfoundland. In 2003, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that the Roman Catholic Church is responsible, vicariously liable, for sexual abuse by its priests in the Diocese of St. George's. In February 2009, the Supreme Court of Newfoundland and Labrador ruled that the Roman Catholic Church in St. John's was responsible, vicariously liable, for the sexual abuse of 8 former altar boys by disgraced priest, Reverend James Hickey. In 2007, Reverend Wayne Duhay was charged with sexual assault and 1 charge of exploitation of a minor. The charges were dismissed due to insufficient evidence. The abuse allegedly occurred between 1996 and 2000 and started when the alleged victim was 14 years old. Duhay was admitted to counseling in 2001 when the sexual relationship was acknowledged by the church. Controversy over the legality of the sexual relationship occurred because it was unclear whether Duhay was in a position of authority over the 14-year-old Anglican, who was placed at his church for mandatory community service. Ontario and Ottawa. Ontario. Historical cases of child sexual abuse by Catholic priests within the Ottawa Archdiocese date back to the 1950s. Newspaper records of documented cases involved at least 11 abuser priests and 41 victims. Among these cases was those of convicted child sex offenders, Dale Crampton, Ken Keeley, Jacques Faucher and Barry McRory, all of whom served as priests in the Ottawa Diocese in the 1970s and 80s under Archbishop Joseph Aurel Plourde, whose own role in these cases is well documented but was never held to account by the courts. As of 2016, the Ottawa Archdiocese has paid nearly $600,000 in settlements to abuse victims in 7 lawsuits since 2011. 5 more lawsuits remain, with claimants seeking a total of $7.4 million. In 2016, Ottawa Archbishop Terence Prendergast acknowledged the enormity of the evil in connection to these cases. Dale Crampton. In 1986, Dale Crampton was arrested and pled guilty to 7 counts of indecent assault involving minors. Those abuses transpired between January 1973 and December 1982, while Crampton was a priest in the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Ottawa. The 7 male victims were all between the ages of 10 and 13 when they were assaulted by Crampton. In the ensuing years subsequent to that trial, the number of sexual abuse cases grew in which Crampton was named as defendant. The scope of those new cases extended as far back as 1963, when Crampton was first ordained as a priest. As of 2017, the Ottawa Catholic Diocese knew of at least 17 people who say they were victimized by Crampton as children. Angus Alexander McRae. In 1989, priest Angus Alexander McRae, Archdiocese of Edmonton, Alberta, ordained June 5, 1954, was charged with the sexual abuse of 2 boys in Scarborough, Ontario. He spent several years with the Canadian Armed Forces as a military chaplain. In 1980 he attended court and was sentenced to 4 years for sexual abuse of a young boy. The charges, which included buggery, gross indecency and indecent assault, were laid and prosecuted by military police. He served the first 10 months of his 4-year sentence in the CFB military prison in Edmonton before being sent to Southdown, a treatment center for Catholic clergy. After his release from Southdown, he was taken into the Archdiocese of Toronto by Archbishop Emmett Carter, and was recycled into St. Thomas More Parish in Scarborough. In 1989, he was charged with abuse in Toronto and pleaded guilty. He was then placed on 3 years probation. He later claimed that he only pled guilty to spare the family's further embarrassment, as much as I hated it and against my conscience and to save family's further embarrassment I took it on the chin. McRae passed away peacefully at the Edmonton General Hospital on Friday, May 20, 2011. Charles Henry Sylvester. In August 2006, Father Charles Henry Sylvester, born 1922, of Bell River, Ontario, pled guilty to 47 counts of sexual abuse on females between the ages of 9 and 14 between 1952 and 1989. Paul Bailey, the Crown Attorney for Chatham-Kent, reportedly described the case as being the largest case of non-residential school sex abuse by a Roman Catholic priest in North America. Local newspapers documented the lives of many of the women who refused the publication ban and spoke out about their abuse. Sylvester was given a 3-year sentence in October 2006 and died January 22, 2007, of natural causes after only 3 months in prison. The case was documented by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation new program The Fifth Estate. On May 21, 2020, an Ontario appeals court dismissed a bid by the Diocese of London, where Sylvester was employed, to drop a lawsuit filed by Irene Deschenes, who claimed that Sylvester sexually abused her when she was a minor between 1970 and 1973. Deschenes began legal action against the Diocese of Ontario in 1996. Bernard Ambrose Prince. In 2008, MSGR Bernard Ambrose Prince, born in Wilno, Ontario, ordained in 1964, incarnated in 1992 in Pembroke, Ontario, pleaded guilty to charges of sexual abuse of 13 young boys from 1964 onward. He was sentenced to 4 years incarceration in 2008. He was laicized by the Catholic Church in 2009, and paroled in 2010. His crimes were known in the Canadian Catholic Church and in the Vatican before he was appointed to Rome in 1991. William Hodgson Marshall. On April 30, 2020, the Canadian Supreme Court rejected an appeal from the Basilian Fathers of Toronto to not give victim Rod McLeod a required payment of just over $2.5 million, including $500,000 in punitive damages, stemming from a sexual assault case in the 1960s. McLeod was abused by Father William Hodgson Hod Marshall, then a Basilian priest, when McLeod was a student at St. Charles College High School in Sudbury. A jury had previously ordered the Basilian Fathers of Toronto to make the payment in April 2018 by a jury. Marshall, who died in 2014 at the age of 92, pled guilty in 2011 to 16 counts of indecent assault of minors and 1 count of sexual assault for incidents that occurred between 1952 and 1986 when he taught at Assumption and Holy Names High Schools in Windsor, plus other Catholic high schools in Toronto and Sudbury. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison, and served 16 months of his sentence before being released on probation in 2012. However, Marshall, who was given the nickname Happy Hands in the 1950s due to his tendency to touch students, later pled guilty to more sex abuse charges stemming from his time in Saskatchewan. Kenneth O'Keefe. In September 2012, Basilian Order priest Kenneth O'Keefe, who taught at various Catholic schools in the Ottawa area, received a 9-month house arrest sentence after pleading guilty to inappropriately touching a 16-year-old who was a student at Ottawa's St. Pius High School during a sleepover at his apartment in 1974. In January 2013, O'Keefe received an additional sentence of 9 months house arrest after pleading another, indecently assaulting a then 17-year-old boy who was a student at Ottawa's St. Joseph's Catholic School over the course of 4 months between September and December 1969 as well. Nova Scotia. On August 7, 2009, Bishop Raymond Leahy announced that the Diocese of Antigonish had reached a $15 million settlement in a class action lawsuit filed by victims of sexual abuse by diocese priests dating back to 1950. On September 15, 2009, he was arrested at the Ottawa airport after the Border Services Agency uncovered hundreds of unlawful images, child pornography, on his laptop computer. Leahy was sentenced to 15 months in prison and 2 years probation, but received a 2-for-1 credit for the time he served. Saskatchewan. In 2013, convicted Ontario Basilian priest Hodge Marshall received a 6-month house arrest sentence after pleading guilty to sexually assaulting 2 Saskatoon boys in 1959 and 1961. Quebec. The institution Collège Notre Dame du Sacré-Cœur came into the public eye for a multitude of sex abuse cases and cover-up spanning more than the second half of the 20th century. In December 2012, it was reported that a deacon met a congregation in Beaconsfield, Quebec, and a spokesperson for the Catholic Church on issues of child abuse was charged with possession and distribution of child pornography after police seized more than 2,000 photos, as well as computers and hard drives, at locations in Beaconsfield and Point Claire. Nunavut. On September 12, 2014, defrocked Catholic priest Eric Deja Eger, born April 24, 1947, ordained in 1978, was convicted of 24 counts of indecent assault, 1 of unlawful confinement, 2 of buggery, 3 of unlawful sexual intercourse, 1 of sexual assault and 1 of bestiality that he committed during his time in the priesthood in the Roman Catholic mission in Igloolik between 1978 and 1982. He had already been convicted for 11 counts of sexual assault and indecent assault against children at his previous post in Baker Lake, Nunavut. Allegation against former nuncio. On the 22nd of February, a Canadian man, Christian Vachon, claimed that former nuncio to Canada Luigi Ventura had touched him improperly in July 2008 when he was 32. Vachon said Ventura's successor as nuncio to Canada, Archbishop Luigi Benezzi, called him the day he registered his complaint to discuss it. On July 23, 2020, it was reported that Ventura, who is facing trial in France for later sex abuse allegations, was still under investigation for the alleged 2008 incident in Ottawa. Residential schools. By 1912, thousands of First Nations children attended residential schools, many of which were run by the Catholic Church. In 1990, Manitoba leader Phil Fontaine revealed that he had been sexually and physically abused in a Catholic residential school. He claimed that sexual abuse was common in residential schools in general. In my grade 3 class, if there were 20 boys, Every single one of them would have experienced what I experienced. They would have experienced some aspect of sexual abuse. Canadian author and artist, Michael D. O'Brien, has also spoken out about his painful experiences of residential school abuse, revealing that the sexual exploitation of the young has been epidemic in Catholic residential schools and orphanages. See also: sexual abuse cases in Catholic Church sexual abuse cases Catholic Church sexual abuse cases by country Catholic Church sexual abuse cases in Australia Catholic Church sex abuse cases in Belgium Catholic Church sexual abuse cases in Ireland Catholic Church sexual abuse cases in New Zealand Catholic Church sex abuse cases in the United States William Cam, leader of schismatic Catholic group convicted for sexual abuse scandal in the Catholic Archdiocese of Dublin sexual abuse scandal in the English Benedictine Congregation critique and consequences related topics criticism of Pope John Paul II debate on the causes of clerical child abuse ecclesiastical response to Catholic sexual abuse cases instruction concerning the criteria for the discernment of vocations with regard to persons with homosexual tendencies in view of their admission to the seminary and to Holy Orders media coverage of Catholic sex abuse cases settlements and bankruptcies in Catholic sex abuse cases sex crimes and the Vatican, BBC documentary Survivors Network of those abused by priests, NGO for Victims in USA investigation, prevention and victim support related topics broken rights, support and advocacy group in Australia National Review Board, USA National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, UK Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors Sexual Addiction and Compulsivity, peer-reviewed Journal on Prevention and Treatment Virtus, Program, Church Initiative in USA Vos Estis Lux Mundi, Church Procedure for Abuse Vases other related topics child sexual abuse clerical celibacy homosexual clergy in the Catholic Church paraphilia pontifical secret religious abuse. References